what's happened is, through the decades, our school system has destroyed our notion, the proper notion of what education is. So the schools are no longer engaged in education, but I'll tell you, I'll walk you through a little bit of it. So when you and I went to school, when some older people than us went to school, the focus was academics. And for decades, it was academics. It was like, you got to get your math, you got to get your writing, you got to get your reading, and you got to know a bunch of stuff, and then you're educated. And so during that time, say the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, they then started this movement to say, hey, you know what? The Bible doesn't really belong in the schools. Morality shouldn't be an issue that's taught. Education should just be academics. So get the Bible out. And when they took the Bible out of schools, then they could start degrading the materials that they were teaching, because there was no morality that was attached to anything. So good or bad went out the window. And so then we started to see this shift from the academics. And so now they don't even pretend to teach academics, even though your and my definition, the working definition in the culture of education is academics. Now they're saying, no, it's not. It's actually moral. It's all morality. And the morality is transgenderism, CRT, DEI, Black Lives Matters. So it's completely morphed. And so now, a lot of Americans are waking up and going, well, okay, my idea of education is definitely not that. And what they need to do is take the next step and say, okay, so wait a minute. If the educators are telling me that that's education and I'm in disagreement with that, I'm in disagreement with the transgender, I'm in disagreement with DEI, I'm in disagreement with not teaching children math, I'm in disagreement with the state of Oregon saying you don't have to do math or read to graduate high school, I'm in disagreement with that, then you take a step back, you go, okay, so if that's not education, what is education? Because what we're doing is we're falling back on our old definition of education, which arguably got us where we are today. And the old definition of education was it's purely academic, and it's not. And so then you say, okay, so then what is home learning? I call it home learning because I want to distinguish it, right, from the homeschool and from the school. Home learning is the elevation of the child, the raising up of the child in the way the child should go. It's rearing a child. It's educating a child to be a full adult, to understand civics, to understand forgiveness, to know how to ask for forgiveness, to know how to be forgiving. And also, there's some academics in that too, because you ought to know some stuff, right? You ought to know some history. You ought to know where this country came from. You ought to know that this country was founded by 56 Christian men based entirely on the Bible and the studies of the Bible, right? And based entirely on writings of people who based all of their writing on the Bible, right? So you ought to know this stuff. And partly the reason that you ought to know that stuff is because we're raising people to be engaged as human beings in their communities, and our community is America.
Yeah, I think it was John Adams who famously said the Constitution is written for a moral and religious people. And, when people push back, that's not a Christian nation. It's like, well, what you just said is 100% the truth. Like this, the grounding foundational principles of our nation. And I agree. I do think people are waking up to the education system not solving the problem. You see just the chaos that we've witnessed over the last four or 5 years. So with more and more people moving to homeschooling, home learning, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see parents making when they get their kids out of school and begin to try to teach them or educate them at home?
Yeah, well, the biggest mistake is this focus on academics. And so the parents stand over the child and say, do your math. And you shouldn't do that. Because what school did to us, I don't know, I can't speak for you, but I'm gonna. We hated school.
Yeah.
Hated it. And because of the transfer, we hated learning. But learning's the most fun thing in the whole world. You learned, so you did weightlifting, bodybuilding, that kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
How'd you learn how to do that?
From other people,
You didn't go to
from
school
mentors,
for it?
from other bodybuilders.
You
No,
didn't attend classes? You didn't pass exams for weightlifting and bodybuilding?
Nope.
No, you learned because you wanted to. And it was fascinating to you, I bet. I bet you read voraciously about the weightlifting and the bodybuilding and how to improve your nutrition and all the stuff, right? Because you were fascinated by it, because you wanted to dive into that. And you didn't have the school telling you, it's 10 o'clock now, it's time to do math. Or worse, now it's noon, we're going to have lunch, and you're going to study up on what you're eating to make sure that you're doing the proper things for your body, right? Which would then deter you from learning about nutrition, because nobody likes to be coerced into doing things, which is what the schools do. So the number one mistake that I would say parents so easily make, and by the way, there's no judgment here. I get it. I did it too. I was not the perfect homeschool parent. Okay. I was very standard, frankly. When you focus too much on the academics, it destroys the will of the child to learn. What you ought to focus on is, what does the child want to learn? And then throw in some of the stuff that you want the child to learn as kind of a grand bargain. You're going to get to do this, but first you got to do this. And so I used to make deals with my kids, right? If you can finish all of your academic homework by noon, you get a half hour of games, because my oldest was highly motivated to play games. And boy, he was up at 6 a.m. finishing his work before 11 to make sure that he locked in that game time or whatever, right? And so what happens is, when you move into this home learning paradigm, it becomes a little bit of a partnership, not on an equal footing. You're the parent, they're the child. So it's never like this, it's not parity, but you get to guide that child into adulthood, and you're going to make mistakes, and they're going to make mistakes, and you're going to work it out. But it becomes this great journey, this adventure, to allow the child a little bit of leeway and see where that gets them, and then watch them soar, because they will so far exceed your expectations or even your hopes, because they are individuals. And when they're not hampered by the school locking them in a room all day and telling them exactly what to think and all of that other stuff, and the bullying and the social pressures and all that, then they become their own people, and you fall in love with your children all over again. You get to watch them mature into young adults, and it beats all. There's nothing like it. And what we've allowed the schools to do is rob our society of this great journey, this great experiment, this great developing that we could have had. But the schools have moved in, usurped the role of the parent in the house, caused a rift between the child and the parent, and it's a very sad thing. And when I was like maybe 5 years in, I started to realize that, and I got very angry that the school was so happy to destroy the relationship that I had with my children. And when my children all became teenagers, and I tell people this, as teenagers, they would individually come to my room. My husband traveled a lot, and they'd come to my room at night, and I would, if Kevin was out of town, they were off doing their thing, I would just go to bed and sit on my computer. I did a radio show every morning, and so I would prep the radio show the night before on my computer. And on any given occasion, one of my teenagers would come into my room, sit on the end of my bed, and pour out their day to me, and we would have this discussion. And it wasn't that they were necessarily looking for help; they just wanted to chat. How many parents do you know today whose kids go to school have children who just want to chat with their parents? And so that's the example that I give to people, because people would say, "Oh my gosh, you have 3 teenagers? Oh, you've got your hands full." And I'd be like, "Full of love? What are you getting at?" I didn't have teenagers who rebelled. That is a lie that's been perpetrated by the schools and by the culture, because it's so common for teenagers who have been enrolled in school and separated from their parents so divisively to rebel. But it's not normal behavior. We've only normalized it in our culture because we have normalized this mistreatment of children that we call schooling.